The Queen's favourite retreat was never just a place, it was a sanctuary, a crown jewel hidden in the wilds of Scotland. But when news broke that Prince Edward had been named sole inheritor of the estate, it shattered the illusion of peace, especially for the one person who believed the castle was rightfully hers, Princess Anne. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Dunbray Hall had always existed in whispers, spoken of only in hushed tones among senior courtiers and trusted aides. Tucked away from public view, it was the Queen's escape from the suffocating weight of the crown, a place where duty loosened its grip and silence was allowed to heal. It was there she walked without photographers, spoke without scripts, and allowed herself to be simply a mother rather than a monarch. For decades, Dunbray was not just stone and land, it was emotional ground, soaked in private memories and unrecorded history. And among all her children, it was Anne who shared the deepest connection to it. Anne had known Dunbray not as an inheritance, but as a second home. She rode its grounds as a child, learned resilience in its unforgiving weather, and returned to it during the most difficult chapters of her life. When the Queen retreated there, Anne was often the one beside her, not asking questions, not demanding explanations, just present. That quiet loyalty built an assumption so strong it never needed to be spoken aloud. In royal circles, it was simply understood. One day, Dunbray would pass to Anne. Prince Edward, by contrast, had never been part of that narrative. His visits were rare, his attachment distant. There had been no formal discussion, no briefing, no subtle grooming that hinted at future ownership. Even seasoned palace insiders believed Edward would be excluded from consideration entirely, his name absent from any serious succession conversation tied to the estate. That is why the announcement landed like an earthquake. When the news broke, the media froze, then erupted. Headlines questioned the logic. Commentators searched for hidden meaning. Social platforms lit up with disbelief. But while the public speculated, Anne was somewhere far from London, unaware that a decision had been finalised without her knowledge. No warning, no conversation, no chance to prepare. One moment, the castle existed as a shared memory. The next, it belonged to someone else. For Anne, it wasn't just about property. It was about recognition, about years of unwavering service quietly set aside, about a bond she believed was understood without needing to be written down. And as the shock began to settle, one truth became impossible to ignore: this inheritance was never going to be just a private family matter. It was the opening move in something far more personal, far more painful, and far more explosive. But to understand why this inheritance cut so deep, we need to go back before the Queen's final will, before the feud, before the betrayal. There were whispers, stories told only behind palace doors, that long before her passing, the Queen had made a personal promise to Anne. A promise forged not in paperwork, but in years of shared moments and unspoken loyalty. And then, quietly, she broke it. Their bond was unlike any other within the royal circle. Anne was never the daughter who sought praise, headlines, or grandeur. She didn't need to be flattered to be faithful. Through the Queen's most tumultuous reigns, scandal, abdication, crises, even the shadows of Diana's legacy, Anne stood firm, not with words, but with unwavering presence. In private, those closest to the monarch often remarked that the Queen leaned most heavily on Anne, not for advice, but for resilience, for peace. Dunbray Hall was their shared haven. More than once, the Queen allegedly called it Anne's refuge, a place where duty never outran humanity. And so it became palace folklore, that Dunbray would one day be Anne's. Even senior aides, usually careful with assumptions, spoke of it casually, confidently. "Of course it'll be Anne's," one was overheard saying. "It always has been, in spirit." The Queen's comments over the years, though subtle, reinforced this belief. A passing remark about Anne knowing the land better than anyone, a quiet reference to their shared mornings on horseback. Nothing binding, everything understood. Meanwhile, Edward remained on the periphery of that narrative. He had no visible bond to Dunbray. His role in royal affairs, while consistent, was never deeply rooted in the estate. His visits were infrequent, his interest minimal. No one, not even his own staff, expected his name to ever be associated with the property. It wasn't indifference, it was absence, and that absence made what came next almost unthinkable. In the Queen's final year, something shifted. The staff noticed it first. Long-time aides were replaced with unfamiliar faces. Conversations once shared with Anne became more guarded. Access, once open, began to narrow. And yet, no one sounded the alarm. Not out of malice, but out of denial. The Queen was aging. Her world was growing smaller. Perhaps she was simply pulling away to prepare. But behind the walls of Dunbray, quiet changes were taking root. Legal consultations, meetings off the official calendar, subtle preparations that, in hindsight, were anything but routine. By the time the Queen passed, the shock had been primed, but not for Anne. For her, grief blurred everything, until the day the will was read. Names inked in regal black, seals broken in solemn silence. But when Dunbray was formally left to Edward, it wasn't the ink that stunned the room, it was the Queen's silence. No explanation, no letter, no final words to bridge the betrayal, only absence. Anne's name wasn't even mentioned, a void where legacy should have been. And when the will was opened, it wasn't just the signature that shocked them, it was the silence that followed. It was meant to be a formality, a final respect to the late Queen's wishes. But the moment Prince Edward's name was read aloud, sole inheritor of Dunbray Hall, the room fell into stunned silence. And Anne? She stood up and walked out. Inside the quiet, oak-panelled room deep within Balmoral's legal chambers, only the most senior members of the royal family had gathered. The air was heavy with mourning, yet the atmosphere was more tense than reverent. A single folder, embossed with the royal seal, sat before the Queen's longtime solicitor. No cameras, no aides, just family and the reckoning of a lifetime. The contents of the will were expected to reaffirm what most assumed, that each estate, title and heirloom would be passed on with discretion, tradition and clarity. But when the solicitor reached the page detailing the fate of Dunbray Hall, the cadence of the room shifted. He paused, cleared his throat, and spoke the words that would split the room down a hidden fault line. Dunbray Hall shall be transferred in full, with all rights and holdings, to His Royal Highness Prince Edward, Earl of Wessex. Silence. Not even the rustle of a sleeve. Anne didn't say a word, didn't blink. She simply rose from her chair, eyes fixed forward, and left the room without ceremony. The door clicked shut behind her like a punctuation mark no one dared speak. Edward, for his part, appeared just as caught off guard. His brow furrowed, lips parted, but nothing came out. Even he, by all accounts, hadn't expected such a gesture. It wasn't joy on his face. It was confusion. Across the table, King Charles was reported to have leaned toward Camilla and muttered under his breath, "This will not go down well." And it wouldn't. Not within the family, not with the press, and certainly not with the public. The Queen's will offered no context, no note, no private annex, only the stark decree of inheritance, cold and final. For Anne, the absence of explanation was louder than words. It wasn't just the property. It was the dismissal of years, decades, of silent service, of duty without demand. The castle was never about luxury. It was about loyalty. And now, it had been given to someone who barely knew its soul. Within 24 hours, the leak hit the media. Tabloids ran headlines that stoked the fire. Anne snubbed. Edward's surprise inheritance. Royal rift erupts after Queen's will revealed. Commentators speculated wildly. Was this the Queen's private atonement, a quiet punishment, or a final twist only she understood? But one thing was clear, this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And for the first time in decades, Princess Anne wasn't going to swallow the injustice with royal silence. But behind palace gates, the fallout had only just begun, and Anne wasn't going to stay silent. She's been called the Iron Princess for a reason. Anne didn't plead. She didn't cry. She demanded. Within hours, she summoned senior aides, launched her own inquiry, and made one thing very clear. Dunbury should have been hers. What followed wasn't grief. It was strategy. Within 24 hours of storming out of the will reading, Princess Anne had taken action. From her private quarters, she contacted 2 senior palace aides individuals, long trusted by the Queen during her reign, and demanded access to sealed correspondence, archived estate records, and the Queen's final private communications. Her voice, according to those present, was steady but resolute. This wasn't just personal, it was principle. Anne's suspicion was sharp, almost surgical. She believed something had shifted in the Queen's final months. And worse, she believed someone had helped make that shift happen. "I don't think she did this alone," she was overheard saying, "and I won't let this be rewritten as her legacy." OP. Behind closed doors, the atmosphere darkened. Anne requested a private audience with Edward. What began as a conversation quickly turned into a confrontation. Witnesses didn't hear every word, but aides positioned nearby described the tone as tense, clipped, and unmistakably furious. Anne didn't accuse directly, but she questioned, and she questioned hard. Why him? Why now? What changed? Edward, stunned and defensive, reportedly insisted he had no part in the Queen's final directive. But Anne didn't seem satisfied. The weight of the past, of being overlooked, of watching her lifelong devotion to the crown consistently overshadowed by others had finally broken through the surface. Caught in the middle was King Charles. Desperate to avoid a public spectacle, he attempted to calm the waters behind the scenes. He reached out to Anne privately. No lectures, no orders, just a quiet plea to let things settle. But Anne's answer came not in words, but in action. She cancelled 2 official royal engagements scheduled for the following week. The press picked it up almost immediately. "Is Anne protesting?" screamed the headlines. "Princess walks away from duties over castle feud." Inside the palace, the communications team scrambled. Damage control was now priority 1. But no amount of spin could mask the truth this was a family unraveling. The feud had found its way into headlines, into morning talk shows, into whispers across the Commonwealth. And at the centre of it all was Dunbury Hall, a castle that had stood for serenity, now becoming the symbol of royal division. And Anne? She wasn't backing down. For once, she wasn't the quiet, unshakable force behind the scenes. She was the storm itself, and she was just getting started. But if Anne believed she could reverse the decision, she underestimated the deeper politics already at play. There was one detail missing from the Queen's will, one that turned everything upside down. Months before her death, Edward had made a private visit to Dunbury. What happened there, and what he agreed to, changed everything. At first, the visit had been brushed off by the palace press office. A routine check-in, they called it. But there was nothing routine about it. Edward had arrived alone. No staff, no aides, no public record of his itinerary. He stayed overnight in the East Wing, the Queen's preferred private quarters. And the next morning, a local gardener recalled seeing the two walking slowly through the misty grounds, deep in conversation. What they spoke about remained a mystery. But whatever was exchanged in that final meeting between mother and son would prove to be the hinge on which everything turned. Insiders would later whisper of a legacy pact, an agreement not codified in paperwork, but sealed through mutual understanding. The Queen, aware of her dwindling time, had reportedly made a final request, that Edward become the keeper of Dunbury, not just as an inheritor, but as a protector, a steward of its silence. The estate, she feared, had become more than just a retreat. It had become a vault. Letters, personal diaries, fragments of the family's hidden past, all locked away within its walls. And while Anne's fierce loyalty made her a natural heir in spirit, it was Edward's emotional distance, his neutrality, that made him, ironically, the safer choice. There were whispers, too, of the Queen's fear that Anne, in her devotion, might open those doors too wide, that her passion, while noble, could lead to revelations the monarchy wasn't ready to face. Edward, by contrast, would preserve, would protect, would remain silent. But the most devastating part wasn't what happened, it was who wasn't told. Anne. She hadn't known about the visit, not the conversation, not the pact, not the shifting tides of trust in her mother's final days. And as the truth began to surface in fragments, offhand remarks, internal logs, a forgotten calendar note, Anne's anger transformed into something heavier. Betrayal, not by her brother, but by the woman she'd spent a lifetime serving without question. She had believed her loyalty had been seen. She had believed the unspoken promise. But now, as she pieced together the secret threads that rewrote her place in history, one truth became clearer than ever. This had never been about land. It had always been about legacy, and hers had just been rewritten in ink she never held. And as Anne dug deeper, she uncovered something far more painful than the inheritance itself. Tucked away in a locked drawer, buried beneath official papers, was a handwritten letter, addressed simply to Anne. But the moment she read it, her fury gave way to something far more devastating: grief. The letter wasn't found immediately. In fact, it was weeks after the official reading of the Queen's will that a private aide, organising the Queen's personal effects, stumbled upon it. It was sealed in thick parchment, her handwriting unmistakable. Not royal-headed paper, not official tone, just a mother writing to her daughter. The contents were brief but piercing. She spoke of their bond, how Anne had always been her mirror, her steel, her compass. She thanked her for decades of unrelenting duty, of never faltering even when the world did. But then came the words that undid everything. The Queen confessed she had chosen Edward for Dunbray not out of love, nor out of slight, but because she feared what Dunbray might become in Anne's hands. Not a sanctuary, but a stage. Not a retreat, but a headline. The Queen wrote of politics, of legacies, of wanting to preserve something untouched by modern scrutiny. Edward, she said, will not draw lines in the sand. He will guard it, not wield it. And in those lines, Anne saw the truth. Her mother hadn't doubted her devotion. She'd feared her fire. When Anne finished the letter, she didn't speak. For hours. A silence so deep it unsettled even those closest to her. Then, behind the thick walls of Balmoral, she broke down. Not in rage, but in a grief that felt like abandonment. For the first time in decades, the Iron Princess wept. It was William who found her, and what he said in that moment would later echo far beyond the castle gates. "This," he whispered, "is unforgivable." For him, the issue wasn't about land or titles. It was about trust, about watching the strongest person he knew shattered by someone she had spent her life upholding. But grief has a way of escaping confinement. Days later, the letter leaked to the press. Whether intentional or not, the result was explosive. Headlines didn't just report it, they mourned it. Anne, long portrayed as the emotionless workhorse of the monarchy, was now seen for what she was: a daughter, denied not a property, but a farewell. Sympathy poured in. Editorials questioned why such a decision had been made in isolation. Commentators demanded to know what the Queen had truly feared and whether it had been justified. Because in that quiet moment, through that single letter, the public began to see Anne not as the stern royal she was often painted to be, but as the most human of them all. Loyal, wounded, and finally, visible. But while the family mourned what was lost, others were already questioning what the Queen was trying to protect. Dunbray wasn't just a castle, it was a vault. And as Edward stepped inside for the first time as owner, he discovered what may have been the Queen's true reason for passing it to him, what lay hidden behind locked doors. The keys arrived in a plain envelope. No fanfare, no ceremony, just a silent handover from the late Queen's most trusted aide to her youngest son. When Edward arrived at Dunbray, he expected stillness, perhaps grief. But what greeted him instead was a mystery. The north wing of the castle had long been closed off, even to family. Rumours whispered that it held archives the Queen personally managed, but no one imagined what those rooms truly contained. Behind bolted doors lay decades of silence, meticulously kept journals in the Queen's own hand, reel-to-reel recordings marked only with years, and boxes of photographs, some never released to the public. Among them, chilling references to events never officially acknowledged, diaries chronicling tensions with Downing Street, a tape labelled Crisis 1995, and folders simply marked Diana. As Edward leafed through the contents, a new weight settled on him. This wasn't just history, it was ammunition, secrets that could fracture the monarchy or redefine it. The Queen, it seemed, had trusted no institution with these artifacts. Not Windsor, not Balmoral, not Buckingham, only Dunbury, because it was quiet, isolated, untouched. It wasn't just a retreat, it was her fortress of memory. And now, it was his. Royal archivists were discreetly summoned, not the usual historians who walked palace halls, but a select team, each sworn under binding confidentiality. They didn't catalogue, they didn't digitize. They preserved in silence. What they read, they did not speak of, but even in silence, tension grew. Anne, still reeling from the inheritance, exploded when she learned of the hidden archive. She argued not for ownership, but transparency, that such materials belonged in the royal archives or the public eye. Edward disagreed. He insisted the Queen had made her wishes clear, that the truth, in the wrong hands, could do more damage than silence. Privately, Edward confided to one aide that he hadn't slept properly since unlocking that wing, that every page he turned felt like a betrayal not of his mother, but of the family she left behind. He was overwhelmed, isolated. The castle had become less a refuge and more a reckoning, and the longer he stayed inside Dunbury, the more detached he became. From public life, from family, even from himself. The castle consumed him, and Anne watched from a distance, not with jealousy, but dread, because what began as a question of inheritance had transformed into something far more volatile, a question of legacy. And as the pressure mounted, the castle that once symbolized unity became the battleground for a family in freefall. What started as an inheritance dispute had become a constitutional crisis. With public opinion fracturing and internal trust crumbling, the monarchy stood on the edge of implosion over a castle, a letter, and a legacy. What should have remained a private matter within the House of Windsor now spilled onto the floors of Parliament. MPs, emboldened by public outcry and relentless media pressure, began demanding full transparency regarding the royal estate portfolio. Dunbury Hall, once a footnote in the Crown's hidden geography, was now at the epicenter of a growing debate about wealth, secrecy, and entitlement. Questions were raised. Why was it gifted to Edward? What else had the Queen tucked away, shielded from oversight? And what did it mean for the future of a monarchy already strained by scandal and shifting public loyalties? The press didn't hesitate to sharpen the blade. Windsor Civil War. One front page blared, beneath images of a resolute Anne and a withdrawn Edward. Coverage skewed heavily in Anne's favour. Her decades of stoic service, her unwavering commitment, her role as the monarchy's unbreakable spine, all cast in direct contrast to Edward's sudden inheritance and subsequent retreat. Anne became the people's princess once again, not in the shadow of Diana, but in her own right. Her refusal to be silenced or sidelined struck a chord. Meanwhile, Edward, once seen as neutral and gentle, now appeared evasive. His silence only deepened the suspicion. Was he hiding something? Or was he trapped in a role he never asked for? Inside the palace, pressure mounted. Camilla, watching the chaos swell, urged Charles to act. She reportedly told him in private, "If you don't take control now, the institution won't survive another season of this." But Charles was paralyzed, caught between a fiercely loyal sister and a younger brother burdened with secrets too heavy to share. He feared choosing one would mean losing both, and worse, tarnishing the Queen's final wishes in the process. Outside, demonstrators began gathering. Some waved Union Jacks, others held signs demanding reform. "Not in her name," one placard read, referring to the late Queen. Another, more direct, "Give Anne what she earned." Commentators debated whether the Queen's legacy was now irreparably tainted, her final act of favoritism, setting off the very rupture she'd spent her reign trying to prevent. What had once been a retreat, a quiet castle nestled in the Highlands, had transformed into the beating heart of the monarchy's unravelling. And yet, even amid the chaos, Dunbury Hall stood untouched, locked down, guarded, silent. It had become more than a symbol. It was a question the monarchy didn't know how to answer. Was it heritage? Was it power? Or was it a reminder that even the firmest institutions can be torn apart by what they refuse to confront? But as the storm reached its peak, it was neither Charles nor Anne who would make the final move. No cameras, no aides, just stone walls, Scottish wind, and a daughter saying goodbye to the only place she ever truly felt seen. Anne was granted one last walk through Dunbury, and in those halls, she left something behind. In a decision that surprised even his closest advisors, King Charles arranged for Anne to have a private, unannounced visit to Dunbury Hall. There was no media frenzy, no formal acknowledgement, and no photographs taken. It was not an act of compromise, it was an act of understanding. For all the public noise and private pain, Charles knew what this place had meant to her, and for once, he acted not as monarch, but as brother. Anne arrived without entourage. No royal cars, no flashing lights, just a woman walking through the past, one footstep echoing the ghosts of decades. Each corridor she passed carried a memory, some joyful, some bitter. The old nursery still smelled faintly of lavender, the study where her mother once sat with her, explaining the world. The quiet window seat where, as a girl, she would hide with her thoughts while the world demanded she be everything to everyone. She lingered longest in the chapel. There, under the ancient stone archway, she left behind a single item, a silver locket. It had once belonged to the Queen, gifted to Anne during her teens, after a particularly grueling royal tour. Inside, 2 tiny portraits, a young Anne and her mother. She placed it on the altar, said nothing, and walked away. No grand gesture, no farewell speech, just the quiet act of letting go. She knew it would never be hers again, and perhaps it never truly was. But that moment, that surrender was hers entirely. Later that afternoon, as the mist rolled in, Edward arrived. The meeting between siblings was brief, private, no confrontation, no ceremony. They exchanged only a few words, but to those who had witnessed their rift grow so vast, even those few words felt monumental. Anne didn't seek an apology. Edward didn't offer one. But there was a shared look, a quiet acknowledgement of the burden they both now carried. Dunbury had changed them both, not in who they were, but in what they meant to each other. News of the visit wouldn't surface until weeks later. A palace aide leaked a single quote, one Anne had spoken in passing as she exited the castle gates. "It was never mine to keep," she had said softly. "Only to remember." And with that, the feud faded not into resolution, but into reflection. The castle still stood. The legacy still lingered. But the war was over, not by declaration, but by choice. Because sometimes the fiercest battles are not for land, but for legacy, and in the end, it's not about who inherits, but who remembers. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.